This podcast and its related content are intended for listeners aged 18 and above. Some episodes may include sensitive topics such as trauma, abuse, or mental health struggles that could be emotionally triggering or distressing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This podcast is created for educational and awareness purpose only and does not constitute legal, medical, or psychological advice. Welcome to Sunoh, the listening circle. The name Sunoh in Hindi means to listen, and more importantly, to be understood. This podcast aims to create a circle of understanding for South Asian women primarily, and anyone else who may be interested in these topics, from changing family structures to work-life balance, motherhood, singlehood, and much more. We are hoping to shake off stigma one conversation at a time. This season, we are looking at separation and divorce in the South Asian context. And I'm your host, Harveen. In 2014, an interview of PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi at the Aspen Ideas Festival went viral in not just South Asian but global circles. She said, and I quote from a Forbes article by Moira Forbes and a blog post by the Aspen Institute, she said, "Women can't have it all. We pretend we can have it all." She talked about the biological clock, the career clock, and the necessary support systems that are needed for women to seem to have it all. These statements really hit a nerve for me back then on behalf of all women I knew who were coping with that life. Today, when I think about the same statement from the lens of single parenthood after separation and divorce, both for men and women, I have to acknowledge that it's much harder for parents, and especially for single mothers, to juggle everything. To go deeper into this, we have a wonderful guest who, through her own life journey, will help us peel the layers of this topic a bit further. We have with us today Vrushali Gaud, who is a visionary leader driving systemic change for a cleaner, more equitable future, integrating sustainability and new tech into corporate strategies, currently as a global director at Google. Prior to that, as a managing director at Accenture, she helped scale the sustainability practice. Vrushali started her career as an engineer in the automotive sector and subsequently worked in the policy and advocacy space as an advisor for Confederation of Indian Industries Center for Sustainable Development, which is exactly where we met and worked as colleagues more than a decade ago. Vrushali studied mechanical engineering from Pune University in India and an MSc in industrial engineering from University of Wisconsin-Madison and an MBA from Kelly University, USA. She has lived and worked in US, UK, and Southeast Asia. Along with that, Vrushali is a mother of 2 teenagers. She loves to travel, watch American football, and long conversations over chai, just like today. Welcome, Vrushali, to our podcast. So happy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Harveen. And thank you for creating this space and having me on.
So, you've worked in a very male-dominated engineering career, then moved to policy, to consulting where you are today, which is really fantastic to see your very ambitious professional journey while also having a family alongside. And you first openly talked about being a single mother in your interview with Tiger Hall podcast with Pippa Woodhead, where one of the topics you discussed was on the reluctance of women to talk about single motherhood. Can you shed a little bit more light on why that is? And then, most importantly for today, what made you decide to be vocal about it?
There's so many layers to unpack there. For most women, I think there's like 3 big things that we carry. Like part of this is, just how we are raised and the cultures we come from and what we share, where we share, who's in our communities. As you grow through life, you're a wife, or your mom, you're a daughter. So you carry the other aspects of how you want to show up and how you reflect on your family, how you talk about things. And then there's the career part of it, the professional aspects, how you show up as somebody who is either early on in your career or even as a leader. And like when people are looking at what you're doing. And if you put all of those layers together, I think we all build a narrative arc on the outside of how we want to be seen as. And it's very difficult to step away and be honest or be vulnerable about pieces that don't fit that arc, right? So most people know me as somebody who has, reasonably good career, who's a good mom, who's trying to navigate what a lot of us are balancing There are pieces of our lives that are work in process. I think that's a really hard thing for us as women, especially to kind of transcend and figure out where would that perfect balance be, how much to share, where to share. And so I think that is one reason why most of us are reluctant. The first time I talked about being a single mom was the podcast a couple of years ago. And I had a lot of interesting and a lot of really, really amazing women and men and parents who reached out and said, this is fantastic. Like, thank you for sharing this. And also, sort of just creating space and being open about it. That was very empowering because there is some bonding between people who have shared experiences and learning from each other. And it also showed me as a different person than what people presumed about me. But there's a lot of others who, and I'll see this friends and family who kind of were like, why would you do this? This may not be the best thing in terms of your career. There is so much judgment around how you show up as a divorced person or as a parent, and you're trying to juggle, and people will make assumptions. What if you don't get promoted or you don't get certain opportunities? And it's happened. So there's a lot of pushback around that. And then there's also the pushback around people will assume this is a sympathy card that you're playing, which I did not see coming. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, that is the last thing in anybody's mind. And so I step back, and I think the way I think about it, nobody aspires to certain things that like single parenting or going through divorce. And, Harveen, you know that too. It's incredibly hard and challenging. It is not a title. It is not something you want to flaunt, but it is a reality of the lives we live. And it is as much a part of me as being a mom, as being a leader, as being a daughter, as being whatever other role I play in my life. And so I feel like it deserves the equal amount of openness and just a matter of fact conversation. It's like everything else in your life. It's just a part of reality. It's a little different reality. You navigate it differently, but I think that was a big part of having these conversations. I'll add one more thing one thing I've been cautious about through this, and I've been now divorced for quite a while, is I have young children. And when I had young children, I was slightly more reluctant only because you want to have their best interests in mind. They have relationships with different parts of the family, with co-parents and their dad. And I'm just being very respectful. But as I've grown, my daughter has helped me through this. And occasionally I was like, hey, would you be okay if I talk about this or if I share this? And she's like, Mom, this is your story to tell. This is your experience. It is not meant for anybody else to judge you for it or talk about it or stop you. So you decide how much and what to share and when to share about it. And I think that was very liberating for me to go ahead and share.
Lovely that your daughter, and that speaks volumes about both you and your ex's upbringing for your daughter, that she has that maturity already to have that kind of conversation with you and make you feel comfortable about your story. And I truly believe that, like you, that we do need more open dialogues on not just divorce, single motherhood, and so many other aspects that, at least in our culture, a lot of times there is this culture of silence. And I mentioned that in one of our introductory episodes, that this was something that I know that when I was going through my journey, I needed. And that's also where, if we don't have that open conversation, we will never create more safe spaces for dialogue. And so let's rewind a bit and go to understanding a little bit more about you, your background, and your growing up years, how they shaped your values and views. Where and what kind of family did you grow up in?
I call myself a global citizen, and that's sort of like what I really associate strongly with, and all the values that come with it, the upbringing that comes with it. I lost my dad when I was quite young. And so in many ways, raised by my mother, there are certain ways it shapes you, to your point. And so I think I always had the sense of maturity. I saw mom who was, even back then, working, making sure the kids have their needs met. We were like a nuclear family, but really happy family and a close-knit family. And that still continues. My mom and my maternal grandmother, I especially remember my maternal grandmother because I very rarely remember any discussion around something that's making her nervous or anxious. She just had this amazing persona. And then my mom, just sincerely, like, we were her biggest priority and how we shaped our lives and kind of carried us through. So that was it. I moved to the US to study, like many others from my generation, got my master's, worked here, got married, had kids. And then I moved around a lot supporting my then husband's career and eventually landed back in the US. And so I moved back from the US to London to India and then back to the US. And so that whole journey, I think, has shaped me in terms of who I identify as. And so I've sort of embraced different cultures and tried to bring the best from each and still retain that sense of identity and created that. So fascinating thing about this is I am a successful professional. I have a career that I absolutely love, but I've taken sabbaticals in my life. I've taken breaks when I thought it was important to support my family. And a lot of times as people find that surprising. And I say like, look, you always do what you do in the moment that makes sense. And since one of the things, because my dad passed away soon on, I had a strong sense of a family unit. And so I did what I could to like move or just be there when my kids and my family needed me the most. It's a very interesting phases of life when you've gone from being a professional mechanical engineer to taking sabbaticals, being a stay-at-home mom, to again rebuild your life the way you wanted to, and then find yourself to be a single parent, trying to rebuild everything financially, emotionally, professionally, and here I am.
That is indeed an incredible journey, Rushali. And it's also interesting to see that with the early passing of your father, how you still had strong maternal figures in your life that created this positive mindset despite the changes that may be happening in your daily lives. And that brought also the strong sense of family for you. And I'm also wondering that during those early growing up years, how were the conversations on freedom, on ideas of opportunities? Of course, as we see and hear that your education and career, you've had a fantastic one at that, even with the breaks and sabbaticals. But during your early phase in life, how were these conversations with your family and what were you seeing around your city where you had your upbringing? Because sometimes in India, that does make a difference in the level of exposure young girls have or not, and the kind of extended family that you may have or not. What was that like?
Yeah, it does. It does, right? Like you don't really realize that when you're that young, but the way you're born, families, locations does play a role, at least in those initial years. Pune was the automotive center and the engineering center of India. So I had the privilege of being surrounded by really good academic and technical STEM-based fields. And then, of course, you're in this sort of family structure, lower middle class, where education, getting into a good university, getting into a good job is like the way that you would progress. And so I think I followed that path. The unique part, I think, when I look back and I appreciate is I did have the liberty as well as the guidance, whether it was through conversations, whether it was through books or through just seeing what I had around me to make choices. I'm one of the few female mechanical engineers in my class at that point. This was decades ago. And then since then, it's amazing how many and have come through. And I'm so happy about that. And similarly, when I decided to start and work in an automotive factory, there weren't as many. You don't intend to be first in things, but it was sort of like, okay, this is what I want to do. And this is how we go about. And I was privileged enough to be in a space and time where those opportunities opened up. They had their own challenges. But I think at that point, the mere fact that I could get a degree I wanted, work in a space I wanted, that in itself was great. And then coming to the US, I think a lot of us, looked at US as sort of this place you could explore for a future education, research, and look for opportunities. For me, frankly, it was also a financial decision. It was cheaper coming because of financial aid and scholarships that I got to come to the US than studying in India. I thought, why not travel and see the world? And so the first flight I ever was on was to leave India to come to the US. And I knew my ex-husband through our undergrad, even though we were not dating when we were back in India. We landed up serendipitously at the same university, similar program at Madison, and then got married and stayed there for almost a decade.
From a wedding point of view, was it in India? What was the kind of cultural aspect to it?
So we made a trip back, got married. And again, nothing unique in that part, sort of like studying, trying to find your footing back in the US and whatever came with that as to looking for jobs, being in cities, carving out your married life along with finishing up your education or settling into the US. I think I was a kid in some ways. I got married in my early 20s, married my best friend. A lot of our common friends were either those we had studied with back in undergrad or grad school. So to me, it was pretty similar to what my friend circle and my peer group was. And a lot of our time went in exploring the US, sort of settling into our roles and building early parts of our career. I think the biggest shift for me, which I think when I look back at my career years, were the choices I made in terms of work or in terms of raising a family. Like I said, I took sabbaticals because I do feel childcare and what it takes to raise children is not talked about as much. And I'm super passionate about it, especially if you're relocating, traveling, living outside of your communities where you grew up or without any support system from your family. You have to make choices that seem best for your situation. And so I think, you talked about Indra Nooyi, and she has an amazing sentence when she says that women can have it all, but not at the same time. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And I do feel that was sort of true when I look back as to we all want it all. We want successful careers, really happy marriages. We want great kids, and we want to be the best daughter, wife, mom, but whatever role we are playing, lead and do something purposeful with our lives and sort of leave behind either a legacy or a footprint that we're proud of. But life has its own journey and life has its own story that it plays out. And you have to decide what you want, when you want it, and to what intensity you want it. And so there are parts in my life that I chose to dial down on the career and ambition a little bit, but also use it a little bit more of an exploratory phrase. And I was thankful for having a ex-spouse whose career was flourishing at that point of time. So it seemed like a good fit. And then I was also grateful afterwards when I wanted to lean into being a mother a little bit more. And when we were living in London, and I loved hanging out with my kids at museums, and then pivot into picking up my career when I thought like, okay, this is when I needed to. Some of it was forced because of situation. Some of it was right timing. And you can have it all, but I think you have to expand your time horizon and the intensities in which you dial it up and down. And so I do appreciate that sentence as I've gone through my life more and more.
Around what time in your career was that you took those few breaks or dialing down a bit, or also the sabbatical you referred to earlier?
Most of it was when my kids were younger. And I'm glad I had that space. Also because of just the kind of career choices my ex-husband had. You had to have one parent who was slightly more involved in the house versus the other was had a little bit more travel-oriented work. And I was exploring the switch into, I don't know if there's a correlation, not necessarily a causation there, but I used that time to do things that were slightly different from my work experience up until then. And that's kind of when I shifted into more sustainability, energy transition, climate, like all of these other pieces of my world. And then as my kids grew older and I landed in Delhi where you and I met, I had realized by then as to like, I want to have some policy background and experience besides just corporate. And moving to Delhi seemed like the perfect place and opportunity. And then just moved back into a much more professional space. And then the biggest move for me, obviously, was when my divorce was a surprise to me, but no one sees things coming in life. I think that was a very seminal turning point where it's not just a career, it's not just things that you want, an ambition, it is a financial responsibility. You have to raise your children, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to make sure you're doing the best you can. And I think that's when I sort of dial up the intensity in, how that shapes up and that I can be the best parent and mom for my kids that I could.
And you're right, no one prepares you for these changes in life. And maybe we can understand how everything panned out for you in terms of where were you living at the time? How did this decision come about? Where were you in terms of your career? Like, yes, you dialed it up, but were you already working at the time? How many years were you married by then?
Oh my gosh. I've been divorced for a while. And so I kind of pause when I look back and answer these questions because, one of the things people don't tell you is how much history and how much life and depth that goes into having a marriage, having a partner, having a family. And when you move, those things shift. It doesn't matter why, right? It doesn't matter what situation results in that. Some see it coming, some don't see it. So for some situations, it's warranted. The others explore through it. It's a shift. Your life full of memories and history and love and affection sort of reduces to documents that you sign, and then your life shifts completely. And I don't think people realize the impact of that. It's a moment, or it may be a moment, depending on how long the process goes, but it's a lifetime of shift. My gosh, a decade and a half or more. And, my ex and I were best friends, and we were good friends for like 2 decades or more. And so it's a huge shift. And when you have kids involved, you have to realize it's a transition and we have to give ourselves the space and grace to go through it, which is what I think I have now on reflection, but not when I was in the phase. I'll share a couple bits of that, which is the early part of when I was going through this. I think I carried what most people do is you're either feeling like you're a failure, this was meant to be forever and it didn't work out. You feel like you failed in some ways to live up to either your expectations, societal expectations, family expectations. And again, I think for most of us, nobody asks for this. Nobody aspires to this. You just find yourself one day at a point and you see this is happening and you then decide, how do you navigate that? But between those phases, you go from denial to sadness to just sort of like this, what next? And then acceptance. And then you're back in some other phases constantly. And that took months to years for me. And especially when you have children, you have to keep aside your emotions and your being at times, just to focus on making sure they are protected and they get through the best they can. And so going back to your question, life sort of evolved. I found myself in the situation I did, and I took decisions. I think collectively, what I think was just always for all of us, putting the kids up front. Had opportunities to rebuild my career, and my kids have been super supportive. I think all of us underestimate certain people who show up. And for me, it was like some good friends, my mother, some family and colleagues and different people, and even strangers sometimes who've shown up and helped you sort of find your space and way back.
And, Vrushali, even though I don't have children, but I think for our listeners too, especially for those who are maybe early on in their decision or maybe they're middle of things, I think it is so helpful to hear the perspective of others who've gone through it and you have a certain distance from it as well, learning that it is possible to go through it and come out so strong, and that you even take time to remember certain details, and details probably are not even important anymore. But thank you for also sharing that very poignant point of lifetime of changes when separating from a person could occur that, thought you'll always spend your life with. And it is a process, as you say. I think that failure part really struck me because I remember thinking and dwelling on that point. And now I feel as if I probably never thought that as a failure for myself, but it is so much social conditioning that leads you to believe as if you were. And today I could not agree to it at all that this is a failure in any way. It has brought so much new facets for me as an individual where I am in my journey. Mine is still early on, but I can already see such a major shift. And like you, I hope that those who are in this journey can find hope that things are going to change and they're going to get better.
Yes, a lot of these are all our individual experiences, right? What's true for a single mom probably is true for single dads in some other ways. I will say this, it's a legal process from the outside, but it is very emotionally driven for those who are involved in it. And just things are different from what even you might be conditioned in a normal time. So if anybody's listening, I keep going back to this concept of giving yourself space and grace because of the fact that, it's an unnatural time. It's not something you plan for. And so behaviors are different. You see different people turn up differently, and you can use a little bit of a filter of like, oh, these are the people who faded away, but these are the people who stood up and helped. And doesn't always mean that you're right or they're like enablers, but they're people who listen and kind of help you and have the patience for that. So you realize your village changes through this, which was a very big part of my learning. And especially kids, they're interpreting things differently as to like, hey, why do I only have one parent with me all the time and not both? And why is my family a little different? And so you change. So your village has to evolve a little bit along with that. The other one was you mentioned about this thing about being a strong woman. Speaking for myself, you don't start out saying, I'm going to be the strong woman who's going to do this. I believe in, being in that unit and sort of living as a family. I think situations make you that. And you just sort of step up. So I feel like a lot of my success and strength, a lot of people assume that could cause certain things. And I'm like, no, it didn't cause certain things. It's almost an outcome because you had to get up and do what you had to do. And then the next step and, move on. And just because you are a strong person doesn't mean you don't have pockets when, you do go through doubt. Like I think going back to what you and I started with, you go through phases of, is this a failure? I had a lot of self-doubt and, you question yourself, am I not good enough in some way? Like I couldn't be good enough as a wife, or I couldn't be good enough as a mom because I couldn't give my family, the typical structure that you see. Was I not good enough as a daughter because I'm causing my parents or my mom sort of this late in her life, like now having to support and help me through things. And you kind of you carry that burden, I think, behind a layer of strength. There's a lot that you've carried that you're trying to navigate and think of how to unburden and learn as you go through life. And the same thing I think happens in work. Like for me, my work was therapy. It gave me a purpose. It helps me raise my kids, give me a sense of identity. Then the pressure you put on yourself to perform there too, and not use any excuses or not show up with all your baggage in any which way, which I think you do it normally, but I think you do it even extra. So I think like behind all of that, there is a real person who's navigating through it. And so just giving yourself time is a big part of it.
And like you said, Vrushali, giving yourself that space and grace, I think that's really a valuable lesson for everybody listening. And I think, especially when you have children, there's a lot more complexity to what you're dealing with. There are many decisions. And you also mentioned that sometimes it was their well being that you had to prioritize over what you were grappling with and choices and reflections you were having. So, other than keeping yourself occupied with work that was therapy for you, what made you manage and what were your go to things that helped you carry on? You said your village changed, but there were some friends and family that were your support system. If there were parents who were listening, both men and women, what would be the advice you would give them so that they can be functional for their kids, but also not shut out their own process? Because clearly there has to be that individual process as well.
Ah, that is such a deep question too. And first of all, I want to go back and say this again. Like this is such a tremendous topic, and it's almost like something you want to have around a fireplace with your friends and a cup of tea, right? And so I'm hoping those who are listening sort of are in that headspace too. And not everything I share is perfect or is the way it should be. I'm still learning. I'm still a human trying to figure things out the best. When you think about the structure of families and marriages, and I think it's true for every place. I think culturally for where we're from, it's South Asia, it's also even more. It is not just two people. It is families that bond together, right? I had a fantastic relationship with my in-laws and my father-in-law. And you learn different cultures and you sort of embrace this bigger community. However it is, for the most parts, for a lot of us, when you go through those divorce, that cracks and that breaks and that reshapes and reforms in different ways. And I think it's really hard on the individuals going through it, the immediate families going through it, but also the extended families to go through it. And especially if you've been in this for a longer time, over decades, it's transcended into deeper relationships. So I think just being mindful of that you're not just individuals, but it's actually like restructuring of so much in your life. And it takes time. And it takes time for everybody to come to terms with it. And how do you come out of it depends a lot on the situation that you're in, right? In some cases, you have a lot more strenuous and stressful, sort of moving apart. In my case, my family, they always looked at both me and my ex as their own like kids and sort of, both sides and embraced us as such. And so it was difficult going through it. No parent wishes this on their children. They have their own societal pressures to be fair and how they navigate that, which also turns into different stories. And like from my vantage point, I think all I can say now, again, having been through this for a couple of years, is it is hard. It's not perfect, but just doing what you can right in that moment and being there and listening to the both sides. I do feel experience and age plays a role so that the effects parents can help navigate some of that without interfering, but just being the pillars that they've always been, I think is super helpful. In my case, even for the children, it's important because we have our own set of emotions. They need another layer of blanket on them and love and affection. And so that helped. What also, I think, especially when I think about like for me who had taken so many sabbaticals and my career probably wasn't at a point where it would have been if I had just completely focused on that, the need to accelerate, to need to like jump back in meant that I needed support, either emotional or in tacticality or whatever from extended people. That help or just the encouragement or just the space to listen when you're going through processes is important. You probably agree with this. Divorces can be a very lonely process and very personal. A lot of us, like it's easy to talk about certain aspects now, but even now it's harder. And like even when you're back then, so you really need your close community slash parents or like good friends or whoever it is to help you through that.
Yeah, indeed. And the loneliness, I think maybe the fact that I was in Germany, I actually found therapy quite useful. I think for me, that really did become like this way of drawing boundaries because most of my friends were my colleagues, and there were only a handful of them that I could really open up about without feeling this personal professional boundaries getting blurred in any way. So for me, therapy was also something that helped me or is still helping me in a way. And you've already mentioned, Vrushali, that you were also trying to now accelerate your career and you are an ambitious person. Was balancing that with being a mother of young kids? How easy, difficult were some of the choices during that time? What kind of support system did you have for that thought?
Before I answer the question, going back on the therapy aspect, I do feel like your emotional aspects and your mental health is a huge part of what also needs support through that. So it's not just professional, it's not just physical, it's not just financial. And you need these, either if it's through therapy or it's through professional coaching or you have good advisors around you through your family. But it does help having sort of a neutralish person. We had spent so many years together, our entire social circle was all common. And so it's very difficult in terms of like where and what you confide in and how people make things out of it. And what happens within a marriage is really between those individuals. And so I do feel good therapy, which is in the best interests of everybody involved, does help a lot. I think acknowledging that you have all these, I've dealt with my share of anxiety and panic and you go through depressions or you go through cycles of like, what next? And you don't always feel you have the courage or you just need some additional help making decisions. And you want to show up as a person in good spirit for everybody else, like your kids or your work or whatever. So there's enough other things that are taboos. Please don't make mental health another one, get help and the best way you can that can help you through that phase. So yes, that aside, my grandmother had this amazing thing is like, life is like a book. You keep turning the page and you don't like the chapter. You figure out what you write. You can write your chapters. You can, keep moving through it. But that's the beauty of life. And I feel like I didn't sort of like envision what book this has to be and what chapters I'm writing. It's really like very like, what next? Okay, I need to get back on my feet. What next? I need to get in, back on my feet to an extent that I feel good about it and that I feel confident. And I think it just sort of builds off of that. I always acknowledge the opportunities coming your way, but then also then finding a way to say yes to the opportunities. And I've had a good support system around that. So just jobs that came along at the right time. I say this: one door closes, many other open. You just have to decide which one you walk in and then you see where it goes. To me, ambition is not about just this career, to me, ambition is about making the best use of the time we have and doing the best we can for whatever that is that you like, whether it's your work or, what activity you're engaged in. And I am ambitious for me, I'm ambitious for my children, just to lead and fulfill things I think that I can do the most effectively. And that involves doing good at my work and excelling and growing from there. I'm also very fortunate. I work in a space that is quite purpose driven, in terms of my intersection of business and sustainability. And it just gave me another sense of, if I'm excelling at this, which means I'm doing something that's benefiting the world.
With single moms who are also professionals, I think this question often maybe is more asked to mothers than to fathers. And which is why I also want to understand that a little bit from your perspective, because you've also worked in so many different countries, that if you were to compare and contrast that with being a single working mother in US, in India, what kind of similarities or differences do you see there? And which one would be better or worse? Because sometimes there are infrastructures that for childcare and stuff that could be great in US, UK, Germany as well, whereas there's more family support systems back home, and only in major cities are we seeing better, reliable childcare coming on. What are your thoughts and reflections on that?
I've moved around a lot, but I've predominantly looked at US and India as the two places that I spent most of my time. I say this, maybe a good way to put it is India gives me roots and the US gave me wings. It's true in many different facets. When I was younger, I moved here with 2 bags, trying to find my wings as this sort of like young professional learning. 2 decades later, I found myself back here with 2 kids in tow. And again, trying to figure out, how do I navigate this part of my journey and flourish in that? And I do feel both places. Every place, it's like home is what you make of it, right? Every place has its uniqueness, things that help you in that time frame and things that you want to do differently. So I don't think it's fair in a comparative basis as to one is better or the other. Yes, you have infrastructure in terms of your family and communities, but even in India, you don't always live with them or next to them. You're in different cities, and that has its own complexity. You have a more affordable help, which is great, but that again is comes and goes. You do have a sense of community, I think, that comes from a lot of South Asian cultures, which obviously is a big part of what that brings along. And the US has its own different ways of sort of infrastructure working, what people are focused on. It has its pros and cons on both sides. And I think just personally, I'm the kind of person who finds what works in that moment and then you build around that. I will say that kids are very resilient, and my kids are no different from any other kids who go through divorce and have had their share to navigate with and will probably continue to navigate and like process, and there are aspects of their life that are different. But at the same point of time, they rise up to the occasion, they grow differently, they're more independent. You simplify your lives in different ways where you are. And so I do feel like it's sort of like how you shape the world around you versus how you let the world shape your space.
India gave me roots and US gave me wings. I love that statement because you're right. All these environments are shaping you as an individual, what you're navigating.
But I will say this, it doesn't matter which country, which place. Certain things you navigate both ways, right? When I started off saying like the biases that people might have because, how much time are you giving your kids? Is it enough or not? How much time are you giving at work when you have all of this at home? And like, how are you balancing it? Those are everywhere. And those are layers. There exist as a woman trying to build her space, as a parent trying to establish your space, then a single parent trying to establish your space, and single mom. So you just sort of like build off of that. And so those, I think, are just universal things for us to think through is how does work and family and the structures we have and the support systems we have rise up to the occasions for everyone? I think those challenges exist everywhere. I say this, no matter where you are, it's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration, and how you integrate it. It depends a lot on who you work for, how you work for, what you want from it, and, it's the colleagues and community that you have.
And Vrushali, you also are touching on the topic when it comes to work-life balance quite a lot in some of the answers. Do you agree with that statement that I made that, men don't get asked certain things, but women do? And how is the cultural difference there when it comes to certain countries? And the only reason I ask is because maybe I have a hypothesis here to say that sometimes some of these questions are a lot more probing in our South Asian communities, whereas sometimes as an expat, I feel living in my German bubble, I'm asked less ridiculous questions here than I would be back home. Although, yes, some cultural aspects would be similar, but would men be asked the same questions as women?
Look, there is always a cultural aspect to it in terms of like where you're from and what communities are from. I think you see those variances everywhere. Even within a country, you'll see variances. Within a community, you'll see the variances, and across continents, you'll see the variances. So I think if I keep that aside a little bit, I do feel like women and men sort of, we have the envision different roles they play. We envision what we think about success looks like. And so to me, I don't take it as a negative as much, but I do feel like, yes, you're all held to different standards, which is not probably fair. And then we should do what we can to navigate that and balance that. But it's no different from being a female professional than being, like I said, a single parent or a single mom. It just adds layers to it as to what kind of questions come your way. How many dads coming back to work, are asked like, oh my God, you're back to work. Amazing. I don't know how you're balancing it. Versus how many moms, and it may not always be in a negative tone. It may be just from a matter of fact tone, but it is true, right? You kind of question that. At the same point of time, I think I've been through enough life to say some of those questions and differences come from how we are biologically different, how we navigate life differently. And so maybe we do need a little bit of different spaces in some ways. To me, it's not a sense of being that you want it to be equal, but you want it to be an equitable place. And when I say equitable, it means understanding that people have different roles and different sort of needs, and then balancing it off of that.
Yeah, I like that. Equitable rather than strictly equal.
I think equal is a very interesting term because you're not same. I love the fact that I'm a mom. I'm not a dad. I'm a mom, and I love it. It's just different. I'm a female leader at work, a woman leader, which has its own different attributes. And I'm not trying to stereotype in any way. You want to be known as a leader first. but you also want it to be equitable in a way that it acknowledges your differences and makes space for it and flourishes on those differences rather than underwhelms it.
Yeah, that's very nuanced, Roshali. Thanks for that perspective. It's made me think a little bit more now. And maybe also moving a little bit from the motherhood aspect, but looking at you as an individual working in the US as a divorced person, are there also stereotypes or labels that you have come across, whether in the US or in the South Asian community? Like, I know I have, and I find it easy to navigate it from a distance here. But yes, being back home can sometimes be problematic, at least in my experience or some other women I've spoken to. How do you tackle that day to day if you've come across anything like this, or what differences you see in both the countries?
I've loved both places. I've had good and crazy experiences in both places. I will say this, having moved in and out of India, India has also culturally shifted a lot. And maybe it's places where I have lived. I grew up in Pune. I lived extensively in Delhi and Gurgaon. It's a melting pot. And again, it's your immediate circle, right? So sort of consciously or unconsciously, I think I have seen openness in places where you'd be really surprised. And at the same point of time, in the US, I have a lot of people who grew up with me or who've known me from like before and have their own views on that. So if I had to go back to your question, I think the biggest challenge is the labels we give ourselves. If there's a therapy out there, I've probably done all of it. And if there's a book out there, I've probably read all of it. And so now maybe I'm sounding like I've put all of this little that into me. But I do feel like the biggest challenge for me has been the labels that I give myself versus what others do. A lot of people don't really care. Like, you're just a passing thought for most people. What matters most is the opinions of the people who you decide get to have an opinion on your life. And I think I've learned over time that initially you all thought everybody should have an opinion and what people think of you. And then that circle becomes a little closer and closer and closer as you grow. I do feel like it was more the burden I carried on myself than anybody else. When I fill forms, oh my God, the number of times they're asked to fill, whether you're like married or divorced. And I'm like, why does this matter to you here? And this has been like years ago. Like, why am I still carrying this? This is not like a recent thing, you know? So there are just weird societal processes that I think I don't want to say intentionally, but like put this in your face constantly when it's not needed, or like family structures. I feel like my kids probably see that. Like, you're always asked like mom and dad and where are they and what's their names and what's their addresses and everything. And you're like constantly, I get it. But I feel like we have imposed on ourselves this perfection and this way of how things should look like. And every family can be different and people can be different. And we don't appreciate and welcome that diversity. So that's been a big one. It's weird, like people don't realize this, but how the taxes work and how the financial documents work. And when you need people to sign off on stuff, this is a very strange thing. When I wanted to rent something, and I have sort of in some ways been passed up on because I was a single person earning versus like two, or because more recently, I don't have the long history of earning as an individual. And I'm like, oh my God, here I am trying to fight my way back. And the process is such that I have a great job. I earn enough to pay for myself. But the fact that you don't have a spouse to sign with you, and I think those are more, to me, from a systemic perspective, those are actually issues to like really deal with. It's less about the title, but what those things carry with it and the consequences of it.
That formal aspect of it and the consequences of it is really the weight than the labels, as you said. And also, why, after all these years, are you still checking that box? And the implications of this are much bigger also for not just working moms, but also women who may have taken a much longer break in careers, or some who have maybe not ever worked. Because there are a lot of women where they took like decades of their careers and they are really, really starting at a very different point. And in fact, for many people, like, where women were part of the decision of deciding to take that divorce, often it was the financial consideration keeping them stuck in some bad marriages as well. Also, in many other smaller cities in India, at least, or South Asia, divorce and this decision to separate is still such a taboo in so many different places. The statistics would also shock you to know that currently, still, India's divorce rate is just around 1%. Even though globally, these statistics don't hold true anymore. Of course, Delhi, Pune, Bombay, Bangalore, those kind of cities, metropolitan, these rates are totally different and very global in comparison. But we still do hear a lot of such conversations too.
I feel like I'm a person who tries to hold two truths in my mind at the same time. So this is one of those two truths. Part of it, Harveen, I do believe in families. I do believe in good, happy marriages. I do believe in partnerships. And when you make those decisions to invest in it, giving it your best shot, right? And so there is a portion of that I always say is, don't be reactive. It's not an Instagram instant gratitude kind of a thing. And your life is not a bunch of shorts. It's actually a long journey, and give yourself space to make sure you've given it effort and work through it. So that's one part of the truth that I try to hold. The other part of the truth is that you should never be in a place where you feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, right? And at the end of the day, all of us have one life to live, and we owe it to do it in the best possible way for us and what's best for our families, and if children are involved, for the children. Like I said, I had taken breaks, and financials are a big part. And I will say this to you, for the majority of the divorces, and the statistics show that single moms do land up being in a very financially constrained place. And there are many different reasons for it, right? Like, one is just you take breaks when you're having children, your career doesn't accelerate as much. None of that is a reflection on right or wrong, but just the realities of how it stands. Childcare becomes expensive. Young kids need their moms a little bit more at different phases. So there are many dynamics there which make it difficult. And then financials do dictate the way you make those decisions. And all I can say is do what's right in the moment. But at the same point of time, looking back, I feel like I wish I had been a little bit more prudent financially. You never assume things like this, and think a little bit more. Doors open. Life figures itself out. I'll give you my example. I've had privileges of living in houses with swimming pools and penthouses I simplified my life when I had to restart as to this is what I can do now, and this is what works for me. And so some of it is also us letting go of the expectations we might have. And then, like I said, you can have everything, but not at the same time. It does take courage. It does take a village to help you make those decisions. And it also takes a little bit of, I'll say, whatever you call it, luck or serendipity or the right times. And I've built myself back up financially over the past years, and I've continued to do so. So I think it's a journey. You're right. It's both spaces. The journey to remain in the marriage is equally important, but then if you choose to walk away, whether it's your choice or it's been handed to you, you have to think about that in a different space too.
I couldn't have had better words for this. And Vrushali, you also mentioned something like signing for mortgage or things like this that are not always set up to best support divorced parents moving out on their own. Could you also share your observations on what else could structurally be better to help single parents, whether at work, school, childcare, or other things?
Yeah. And I think some of the process stuff is not just single parents. I know so many single adults who, not everybody has the same definition of marriage and like how you live and have kids, and people get married when they're later in life or different ways. So I think there's just a process of what we think the thing should be, and just structurally things need to evolve. It goes back to not just, again, just parenting and childcare, I think, and just the amount of help you need with that is important. So there are processes around that, I feel, which just transcend this example to just a broader, like, how do you raise good families? How do you raise and have good careers? And like, how do you make spaces for those in our lives? Especially when a lot of us now don't live where we grew up, don't live with the families we grew up. Our social structures are different. Our communities are evolving. We all move around a lot more in our lives. And so I think there's just something to be said of how we plan and structure the idea of a community that helps people flourish is one part of it. The other part of it, I think, is you're going through different things in terms of what you want from your life, right? And so I call it's like midlife shenanigans. I'm like, oh, I did not realize, all the different things that are changing, and what success was and not, and what physical health is and not. And you're going through so many different pieces of it. I do feel like we need to have some sort of spaces or activities that are also open to people who may not always have the same structure. You're not young and single, you're a little bit of an older and single person, or you don't always have two parents who are juggling around kids. You might need a little bit different structure of somebody who can help you when you're traveling. You need different people who come in and help sort of make decisions and help you think through situations. So to me, I feel like maybe we've lost a little bit of interpersonal interactions of a much more heterogeneous sort of mixture, a diversity of society. It's like this is young families, this is older families, this is retired parents, this is this. What if you don't fit into one bucket at all perfectly? Where do you go to have fun as a single parent? What is the definition of fun?
Very, very interesting point, Shadi, about identity and what buckets are you a part of or not, and where is society creating that space for diverse families or diverse kinds of individuals. For example, I know that in Germany, a lot of things are so family oriented that as a newly single person, I was really trying to find, okay, what kind of social events am I now invited to or not invited to? And the fact that I've now decided not to have children, where does that put me in my social circle that gets so limiting? And we don't have that so easily everywhere. And it's not even a conversation in many places because you are then just keeping that identity to yourself and navigating life to what it's giving you sometimes.
Like I've been on the other side and I'm still a little bit on some of that, right? Like I have kids and so that becomes my life. And there are people who don't have them and choose. You have to be mindful of that and welcoming of that. Like, let's be honest, you have to be through those structures to also be successful. But you also have to appreciate that sometimes you may not fit in it and a lot of people may not fit in it. And then how do you embrace that and bring them in?
And what advice would you have for newly single moms covering all of these diverse dimensions of an identity, your personal, your professional, everything that you're bringing to the table? And also, based on your own journey, what do you now know that you wish you knew earlier in your single mom journey?
Oh, what did I know? So many things. It's like, hindsight 2020 a little bit. I wished I had a little bit more patience and compassion, starting for myself, right, predominantly, but also everybody involved. I talk about this framework I have about ARC, right? Ambition, resilience, and compassion. Like, are the three things that usually sort of like dictate. And in different phases of your life, I think we all are very good at sometimes of being resilient in terms of like, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to do things, and whether it's the need of the moment or you find a way to survive through things and just do one thing after the other and keep moving. I think we forget the compassion part of it a little bit. And I wish I had a little bit more compassion through the whole piece. Is just happens and how do you navigate it? There's no perfect right or wrong. It's okay to let a few things go. It's okay to take spaces. It's okay to like really not be perfect, but also like fall off the radar a little bit and come back. And it's okay to kind of have missteps and give yourself space for that. And not just yourself, people who are along that with you, right? Like for kids or for friends who may not understand or family who may not. So I think the other part, I think, which I strongly believe, and you mentioned healing is to me not like I've realized that it's not a destination. It's a journey. I think divorce is just one part. People have medical issues, people have other family dynamics, they have job losses, or many different pieces in which uncertainty shows up, in which that uncertainty then becomes, I will say, like a strong emotion. I think grief is a big part of it. I think you just acknowledging that it doesn't just disappear. You don't one fine day get up and become fine and life is all okay. It's a journey. And I don't think you completely heal or get over things or like fully let go of the past because it's always there. It shapes you. You just learn, I think, how to like manage it better, take the good with you and reduce the negativity as much as you can. So I think give yourself that. My favorite sentence these days is give yourselves the space and grace that you will go through it. And it's a journey. And you'll come to the realization that there's no end point. You just manage it a little better as you go. Do you agree, Harveen?
I 100% agree with you, Vrushali. I think I sometimes feel sometimes I'm forward, sometimes I'm two steps back. So 100%, it's a journey, not a destination. And dealing with the uncertainty and the griefs and the ups and downs, not just for divorce, but any health crisis, some other situation, life changes all the time. It's not stopping. There might be even more things happening. Who knows? For the next question, Vrushali, a change of pace for this one. Have you reached a point where you wanted to explore dating again? Or what is the right time for dating as a single mother? And how do you navigate that?
let me put it this way. You have 2 kids, you have a busy job, you're dealing with your own midlife things. Dating is not an easy proposition in general, but like added to this complexity. And most people you're going to meet are also going through similar complexity, right? So having said that, I feel like it takes time to build trust. I am a believer of, as humans, we are meant to be in communities. We are meant to be in nurturing, loving relationships of different kinds. And to me, it takes a while to get through all your history and your scars and rebuild trust and trust in yourself to actually, again, make some choices. So I don't think that's a closed chapter. I think, again, it's something that I'm open for. I think life is too short to close any doors. You'll see where it goes.
Yeah, thanks for your openness to that.
I do feel like my kids will be super excited if I do, only because I'll have less focus on them and I'll have something else to focus on. It's like your energy can go into other things, Mom, than just us.
Yeah, maybe that will motivate you one day. And Vrushali, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And we are at the last part. That is there anything that you want to say that we haven't asked and it's on your mind and you want to share that with us?
I want to end with what I started with, is the appreciation, Harveen, of creating a space and the openness of the conversation. It's not always easy. And I'll say this, and then I think I'll go through it. What did I do? Why did I do it? How did I share too much? Was I being too negative or too positive? We all go through that. That is very human. But I think there is something about listening that others are on the same journey as you are, or they know someone who's on the similar journey. There's something to be said of that circle of like, I'm not alone in this. And I learned a lot from reading, from listening, from everything, from watching people, from talking about their experiences, videos, therapy sessions, to also unbelievable conversations with strangers who popped up in my life at the right time to give me a nugget of wisdom, And in that moment, that nugget of wisdom is important. So thank you for creating this. My story, hopefully, if it even benefits one person, I'll feel really fulfilled about it. I always say that your life being a book and you go through chapters, and some are good chapters, some are exciting chapters, some are not as exciting and some are sad. Some you get to write, some you just play along with. But look at it like that, like keep turning the page and going to the next one. I have over time realized that healing is not a destination, it's a journey, and that you carry that with you. And I think that's really hard when you're early on in those phases, because all you want is like, I want my life to be normal. I want to go back to what it was or fix things. And it's very hard to stay and then still trust yourself, trust the process, and you get better at it. And it's very cliched, but time plays a role. And if nothing else, you just get to a point like, okay, what next? So give yourself the time. And we all have one life to live, and let's make the best and the most profound use of it that we can.
So much learning here, Vrushali. And I have to also quote you here to say that, when you said that you have surprisingly people who come and share certain wisdom with you or spend that time listening to you. And even when we were reconnecting, I remember thinking that we were going to explore some professional aspects where we were trying to connect for the last 1 or 2 years with some messages, with some LinkedIn posts. And then eventually it was the podcast and this conversation that also reconnected us. And I know that you picked up the phone and called me the next day. You gave me such nuggets of wisdom. And I am still also in my early journey. But yeah, the community and the people, the space is important. And I'm glad also, like you, that if it could help even one single person somewhere, then that's great. Thank you so much for your time. It has been lovely, lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much, Harveen.
If you valued this conversation, please share the podcast, rate it, and subscribe to Sunoh wherever you get your podcast from, so that you get notifications with each new episode. It helps more people to find us and join this community. You can also find all the details about the guests in the show notes as well as on our social media pages. Please note that this podcast is for information purposes only and does not replace legal, therapeutic, or other professional guidance that you or someone close to you may need, catering to their specific situation. If you are in a dangerous situation, please contact the nearest hotline or authorities where you can find the help you need. Since our podcast caters to global audience, we are unable to share a lot of countrywide resources. but I'm sure your country, your state, your city, wherever you're listening from, has some resources available for you. To share your story or feedback, please reach out to us. Thank you for listening